My name is Tessa Langley, and on the morning of September 21st, I learned the brutal truth. 5 years of loyalty meant nothing when stacked against one woman's bruised ego. It was just after 7 a.m. in our downtown Seattle office when Lillian Drake stormed into my workspace like a storm in Valentino heels. Her manicured hand jabbed through the air, and her voice practically hissed with fury. "You're being dismissed today," she snapped, her tone acidic. "Last night, at the Pacific Children's Foundation gala, you insulted me publicly. I approached your table and you remained seated. Like a common clerk." Her ice blue eyes narrowed. "My husband will hear about this. You'll be gone by noon." I stood frozen. Not because I was afraid, but because I couldn't believe my career, one I had built tirelessly, was being demolished over Lillian Drake's imagined offense. 5 years of growing our international portfolio from a single partner in Taiwan to 52 global clients. 5 years of early mornings, skipped holidays, and taking late-night calls across time zones. It all meant nothing now. Before I go further, tell me in the comments, has anyone ever tried to sabotage your career over something petty or absurd? Because what happened next was the most satisfying revenge I've ever seen unfold. And if you want more stories like this, please hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell. This story deserves to be heard. Let me take you back to where this began. About 8 months earlier, I was scrolling freelance sites looking to pick up extra work to chip away at my student loans. I have a degree in international business with a specialization in Mandarin Chinese, earned after 2 years of study in Shanghai. I was fluent, and even more importantly, I understood the etiquette, culture, and business protocols most Americans overlooked. Then I saw the listing: Elite Scholar Services. A client in Capitol Hill needed private Mandarin tutoring, twice weekly, $300 per session. No name, just an address, and a demand for discretion, polished appearance, and total confidentiality. I applied under my maiden name, Tessa Morgan, to avoid any connection to my corporate life. Glasses I didn't need, a reserved hairstyle, modest clothing, just another invisible professional behind the curtain of Seattle's elite. When you're working with ultra-wealthy clients, the expectation is clear. Be invisible, efficient, and forgettable. The townhouse in Seattle's Madison Park neighborhood was nothing short of astonishing. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the marble interior in sunlight, and every inch whispered wealth, from the imported silk rugs to the espresso machine that probably cost more than my car. That's where I first met my student, though I had no clue who she really was. She introduced herself curtly as Lena. No last name, no small talk, just business. "You're here to teach me Mandarin," she said, bypassing hello completely. "I need to sound fluent in 6 months. Business meetings, contract negotiations, the works. Can you handle that? Or should I find someone more qualified?" I kept my expression neutral. "Of course. Let's start with your current level." She waved a manicured hand. "I know some words." It took less than 10 minutes to realize Lena knew next to nothing. She mangled even simple greetings, reversed tones, and grew increasingly impatient each time I gently corrected her. But she was driven. I'll give her that. Every session, she pushed herself harder, even if she treated me like background noise. "Bring coffee next time," she ordered once. "And from now on, use the back entrance. The building staff doesn't like outside help in the lobby." I needed the $600 per week. So I smiled, swallowed my pride, and kept showing up. Over time, I started to understand why Lena was so desperate. She was preparing for what she called the deal of a lifetime, a joint venture with Chinese investors valued at $50 million. She told everyone, including her husband, that she was fluent, that she'd studied for years, that she was a natural at languages. "My husband says I pick things up instantly," she boasted during one lesson. "I toss Mandarin phrases into conversation at the club, and everyone's so impressed. They don't realize how business really gets done." The irony was brutal. Lena couldn't hold a basic conversation, even after months of work. I had to spell every word phonetically just so she could recite them. Meanwhile, I was living the career she pretended to have. I negotiated with Chinese firms daily and had built our Asia division from the ground up. But Lena was playing international executive on someone else's dime, and the mask was about to slip. Lena was rehearsing her pitch for the Chinese investors, and it was an absolute train wreck. She stumbled over basic vocabulary, mixed up yes and no more than once, and delivered entire sentences that made no linguistic sense, all with the confidence of someone convinced she was nailing it. "This isn't working," I told her gently. "You need a stronger grasp of foundational language before we tackle negotiations." Her cheeks flushed bright red. "Are you saying I'm stupid?" "Not at all," I replied. "Mandarin is extremely challenging. Most people spend years getting to a level where they can handle business fluently." "I don't have years," she snapped. "This presentation is everything. It's my shot to prove I belong in the business world, not just some housewife with a rich husband." For the first time, I saw something real. Vulnerability beneath all the expensive clothes and dismissive comments. Someone desperate to be taken seriously. "We'll put in more time," I said. "I'll rewrite your entire presentation phonetically so you can memorize it. We'll add scenario scripts too." Her shoulders dropped with relief. "You can't tell anyone about this. If people knew I was getting help?" "Of course not," I reassured her. "Confidentiality is part of the job." Over the next 6 weeks, I became more of a scriptwriter than a tutor. I built her presentation in phonetic Mandarin, added variations for different questions, and walked her through every possible curveball. I even coached her on bowing etiquette, eye contact, and appropriate small talk. If this story struck a chord, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter is one you won't want to miss. She still didn't understand most of what she was saying, but she could deliver it smoothly. That, in her mind, was enough. Her attitude toward me softened slightly. She started offering me sparkling water when I arrived, asked casual questions about my background, and even used the occasional please or thank you. "You're really good at this," she said one evening. "Where'd you learn Mandarin?" "I studied in Shanghai, and I work in international markets," I answered, careful not to name my company. "Impressive," she murmured. But her tone still carried that subtle condescension, like she thought I was wasting my talents on private lessons. "You should work for a real firm." If she only knew. 2 weeks out from the big meeting, Lena had the full script down cold. She could fake fluency just long enough to pass, and she was convinced the deal would make her a star. "They won't know what hit them," she beamed. "This changes everything." I smiled and packed up my binder. "You've worked hard, Lena. I'm sure the presentation will go well." That's when she said something that made my stomach twist. "Oh, and I'll be at the Emerald City Children's Benefit this weekend," she said casually. "It's the biggest charity gala of the year. All the serious players in town will be there. I can finally show off my Mandarin skills to the right people." My heart dropped. My company, Cascade Global Logistics, was one of the event's lead sponsors. I was attending as the head of international development, seated right at the front with senior executives and their spouses. Lena had no idea who I really was. I considered canceling or warning her somehow, but there was no way to do that without breaking confidentiality or revealing my identity. And really, what were the odds we'd even cross paths at a gala that size? The night of the event arrived. The ballroom at the Seattle Grand Pavilion was breathtaking. Soft gold lighting, glass sculptures on every table, and a silent auction wrapping around the room. I wore a fitted black dress, pinned my hair in a sleek twist, and swapped my glasses for contacts. I looked nothing like the conservative tutor Lena saw twice a week. Halfway through dinner, I spotted her across the room. She was stunning in a metallic silver gown, radiating confidence as she laughed and gestured animatedly at the head table. Then I saw him, her husband, sitting beside her. He looked familiar, but it wasn't until he turned and laughed that it clicked. Lena was Lillian Drake, wife of Nathaniel Drake, my CEO. The woman I had been tutoring for 8 months was married to my boss. I barely tasted a bite after that. My pulse thudded in my ears. When dessert was served, I slipped away to the restroom, hoping to avoid her entirely. But on my way back, she came walking toward me, smiling, arm outstretched to greet someone nearby. I ducked into my chair, staring down at my plate. Then it happened. "Tessa? Tessa Langley? one of my colleagues called across the table. I instinctively looked up, just as Lena passed by. Our eyes locked for 2 seconds. Confusion flickered across her face. She almost recognized me, but not quite. Then she turned and kept walking. I thought I was safe. I was so wrong. I couldn't have been more wrong. The next morning, just past 8 a.m., Lillian Drake burst into my office like a thunderclap in designer heels. Her eyes were wild, her expression full of calculated fury. That's when I understood. She'd spent the entire night trying to remember where she'd seen me. When she couldn't place it, she'd filled in the blanks with her own narrative. That I'd purposely stayed seated at the gala, snubbing her in front of Seattle's elite. To her, I wasn't her Mandarin tutor. I was just some disrespectful employee who had humiliated the CEO's wife. She ranted, pointed, hissed something about embarrassment and lack of class, and stormed out as quickly as she came. A minute later, my boss, Nathaniel Drake, stepped in. His face was tight with tension. "Tessa, I'm sorry." I stood there frozen. "You're firing me because I didn't stand up quickly enough when your wife walked past my table? She says you intentionally ignored her, that it made her look bad. That's absurd. I didn't even recognize her in that setting. She didn't recognize me either." He rubbed his forehead. "It doesn't matter. I can't have this kind of drama between my home and the office. I'll give you an excellent reference and a generous severance package." Just like that, 5 years of commitment and results meant nothing. But before I left, inspiration struck. "There's something you should know about your wife's upcoming presentation with the Chinese investors," I said evenly. I sat down, pulled up my email, and attached the archive of tutoring session recordings I'd saved for reference. "Check your inbox," I told him. He opened the first video and immediately went pale. There she was, Lena, fumbling through beginner-level Mandarin, asking me to spell everything in English letters, admitting she didn't understand any of it. "She's been lying to you," I said quietly. "I've been her tutor for 8 months. She can't speak Mandarin beyond a script. Everything she said about her fluency, it's fiction." Then I took off my glasses, let down my hair, and stood tall. "My name is Tessa Morgan. That's the name I used while tutoring your wife. And as of this moment, her Mandarin lessons are over." The room was dead silent. Nathaniel stared at the screen, watching his wife stumble through basic tones any first-year student would have mastered months ago. "The presentation's in 3 days," he whispered, stunned. "I know," I said. I helped her prepare every single word. Lena had memorized her entire presentation like a theater script, right down to tone and pacing, but she didn't understand any of it. If even one investor asked her a spontaneous question in Mandarin or required her to adapt, the illusion would crumble instantly. Nathaniel looked up from the screen, eyes wide with disbelief and something else, fear. "Why didn't you tell me who you were during the lessons?" "She hired me through Elite Scholar Services," I replied. "Strict confidentiality agreements. I didn't even know she was your wife until the night of the gala. Even then, I planned to keep her secret. That's what professionals do." I picked up the last few personal items from my desk, ready to leave with my dignity intact. But since she chose to destroy my career over a fantasy she made up, I consider our agreement null. "Wait," he said, standing suddenly. "Don't leave yet. We need to talk this through." "There's nothing to talk about," I said calmly. "Your wife made a choice. I just want to be sure you understand what that choice is going to cost." I walked to the door, then turned back once more. "Those Chinese investors aren't just bringing money. They're bringing interpreters, executives, and cultural consultants, people who will instantly see through a script. And when they do, well, I hope you're ready for what that means." I walked out of the building, convinced I'd never return. I focused on job applications, LinkedIn updates, and trying to figure out how to explain why I'd been terminated without sounding bitter. But the silence didn't last. Lena left 4 voicemails in less than 2 days, furious, accusatory, spiraling. Apparently, Nathaniel had confronted her with the videos. "You signed a confidentiality agreement," she shouted in one message. "You betrayed me. I'll sue you for everything." I called her back once, mostly out of curiosity. Actually, Lena, you should read those agreements again. They prevent me from discussing your private sessions publicly, but they don't stop me from defending myself when you attempt to ruin my career with false claims. I never lied, she snapped. You told your husband I snubbed you at the gala. We both know that's not true. The line went quiet for a beat. You're still fired. Yes, I said, and your presentation is tomorrow. Good luck. I ended the call. It was time to move on. Or so I thought. But I couldn't shake the thought of the Chinese investors. Some of them were professionals I'd worked with directly over the past 5 years. Mr. Chen Hao from Qingdao Manufacturing always began meetings by asking about family, a gesture rooted in cultural sincerity. Ms. Li Hong from Shanghai Transit Group had a deep appreciation for traditional customs and formal phrasing. She once thanked me for bowing properly during an introduction. These weren't casual clients. They were seasoned executives expecting to engage with someone fluent in both language and cultural protocol. Instead, they were about to be greeted by Lillian Drake and her phonetic script, someone who couldn't hold a basic conversation outside her rehearsed monologue. The morning of the presentation, I woke up with a knot the size of a grapefruit in my stomach. I kept picturing Lena's expression when they spoke naturally, expecting fluency, and realizing immediately she didn't understand. At 10:04 a.m., my phone rang. It was Nathaniel Drake. Tessa, I need your help. I don't work there anymore, remember? The investors arrived early. They wanted to have lunch before the pitch. And Lena's panicking. She's locked herself in the bathroom. She can't hold a casual conversation. I think she's going to walk out. I almost felt bad. Almost. That's unfortunate, I said, but it's no longer my concern. I'll reinstate your job, he rushed. Full salary, promotion, whatever you want. Just please, help us get through this. I paused for 3 seconds. No? Tessa, please. This deal is worth $50 million. If it collapses, we'll have to lay off half the international division. That hit harder than expected. I hadn't built the division alone. It was the product of years of effort alongside some of the best people I'd worked with. I'll make you a deal, I said finally. I'll come in as a consultant. One time only. I'll translate, but not for Lena's benefit. I'm doing it to protect the team. Thank you, he breathed. And Tessa? I understand. After today, you won't have to deal with her again. I arrived 45 minutes early. The main conference room had been transformed. Screens with dual language graphics, Chinese calligraphy centerpieces, and traditional refreshments that showed someone had at least tried to honor their guests properly. Too bad the face of the presentation was a fraud. Lena was standing near the panoramic windows, quietly mouthing her opening lines. She looked poised. Elegant dress, sleek bun, calm posture, but when her eyes met mine as I entered, the illusion cracked. Panic flashed behind her lashes. What is she doing here? She hissed to Nathaniel, her voice tight with fury. Helping save your presentation, I replied evenly, unless you'd prefer to handle the Q and A solo. Her complexion went pale. We both knew she couldn't survive 5 minutes of unscripted Mandarin. Fine, she muttered, but you stay in the background. This is my presentation, my deal, my moment. Got it? Crystal. At precisely 11 a.m., the investors entered. Right on time, no surprise. Mr. Chen Hao greeted me in Mandarin with his usual warmth. I introduced myself as a consultant supporting the presentation. Ms. Li Hong asked about my work in East Asian logistics, and we shared a brief, pleasant exchange about regional tariffs and infrastructure planning. Lena watched from the sidelines, clutching her cue cards. I saw her unease building as the investors smiled and laughed with me. When she joined the conversation and dropped a stiff, memorized phrase, their polite nods turned visibly strained. Perhaps we should begin, Mr. Chen said in English, sensing the tension. Lena took center stage and launched into her presentation. I had to admit, the hours we'd logged together showed. Her pronunciation was fair, her tone smooth. She spoke with practiced authority, and the investors followed along, nodding occasionally and taking notes. Then it unraveled. Excuse me, Ms. Li said in Mandarin. Could you clarify the projected timeline for the Shanghai distribution center? Lena froze. that wasn't in her script. I'm sorry," she replied in English. "Could you repeat the question?" Ms. Lee obliged, slowly and clearly. Lena looked at me, eyes wide with fear. I didn't move. I think," she began, her Mandarin faltering into incomprehensible fragments. Mr. Chen exchanged glances with his team, concern plain on their faces. "Perhaps," he said diplomatically. "We continue in English." The room exhaled, but the illusion was broken. The investors had come expecting a fluent partner, someone steeped in their language and culture. Instead, they found someone reciting lines she didn't understand. A performance, not a partnership. Ms. Lee asked another question, this time in English, about regulatory compliance in Shanghai. Lena blinked. She had no idea what to say. It was a basic question, one that anyone involved in Chinese markets should have been able to answer with ease. But Lena stood frozen, eyes darting from Nathaniel to me, then back to the investors. "Perhaps my consultant could address that," she said, her voice barely audible. I stepped forward, calm and clear. I explained Shanghai's current regulatory framework, recent shifts in compliance enforcement, and best practices for foreign entities entering that region. The investors nodded thoughtfully. From that moment on, every follow-up question came directly to me. For the next 20 minutes, I took over. I fielded inquiries about port logistics, cultural negotiation tactics, legal nuances, and emerging market trends. The room, once tense, now buzzed with genuine engagement. The investors were animated, appreciative, even impressed. Meanwhile, Lena stood off to the side, clutching her tablet like a life raft, completely sidelined at what was supposed to be her grand moment. Finally, Mr. Chen Hao broke the unspoken tension. "Forgive my confusion," he said delicately, "but we were told Mrs. Drake would serve as our point of contact. However, it's clear that Ms." He looked to me, waiting. "Langley," I offered. "Tessa Langley." "Ms. Langley appears to be the one with the appropriate expertise. Could you clarify who will be managing this partnership moving forward?" The room fell into a dense, weighted silence. Nathaniel looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Lena sat down slowly, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Her cheeks were scarlet with humiliation. "I believe," I said gently, "there may have been some confusion regarding internal roles. It might be best to revisit this conversation once the organizational structure is clarified." Mr. Chen gave a respectful nod. "That would be wise." As the investors gathered their materials, Ms. Li Hong approached me privately. "We were impressed with your depth of knowledge and professionalism," she said. "If you were to represent this firm going forward, we'd be open to continuing discussions, but we cannot work with someone who misrepresents their qualifications." Once they left, the room felt like a vacuum. Lena sat in silence, staring at her hands. Nathaniel paced near the windows. I quietly collected my notes. $50 million, he murmured. "Gone." "It was never really there," I replied. "You can't build international trust on pretense." Lena finally looked up, face twisted in disbelief. "This is all your fault." I turned to her and said calmly, "No, Lena, it's yours. This is the consequence of your choices," I said quietly. "You chose to lie about your qualifications. You chose to try to destroy my career over a perceived insult that existed only in your mind." Lena's face flushed, but I didn't let up. "You put your ego ahead of the company, ahead of the investors, ahead of the truth. I poured months into building that presentation. You memorized sounds you didn't understand. For a deal you were never qualified to lead." I started toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth," I added, "I actually felt sorry for you during those tutoring sessions. You were desperate to be seen as competent, but respect doesn't come from how you perform. It comes from how you treat people, how you prepare, and whether you know what the hell you're talking about." "You're still fired," she muttered, voice brittle. I laughed. "Lena, after today, I wouldn't work here again if you begged me." But as it turns out, I was wrong about that too. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Nathaniel. "The board wants to speak with you," he said. Apparently, the failed presentation and my abrupt termination had stirred up more backlash than they anticipated. Several board members had worked with me during previous expansions in Asia. They weren't happy. I met with them the following week. After a tense but honest conversation, I was offered the role of Vice President of International Business Development. The position comes with a 40% salary increase, one of them said. Your own budget, full autonomy over international operations. And Lena? I asked. She's no longer involved. That's been made very clear. I'll accept, I said, under 3 conditions. 1. Written policy barring family members from interfering in employment decisions. 2. I rebuild the international division my way. No micromanagement. Agreed. And 3. I want a formal apology added to my personnel file. Done. 6 months later, the deal with Shanghai was back. Not only salvaged, but expanded. The final value was $68 million higher than Lena's original version. That partnership opened doors across South Korea, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Lena, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale in Seattle's business circles. People who once praised her language talent now whispered about her downfall. She blamed me, of course. But the truth was obvious to anyone who'd been in that room. It wasn't sabotage. It was exposure. The final twist of poetic justice came 8 months after that unforgettable presentation. Nathaniel Drake approached me one afternoon with an unusually measured tone. The board is evaluating a shift in our executive structure, he said. They've been incredibly impressed with how you rebuilt the international division. They'd like to know if you'd consider taking on more. I raised an eyebrow. More as in, they're considering a new role, Senior Vice President of Global Operations. You'd oversee every aspect of our international business, partnerships, acquisitions, strategic planning. I smiled. Sounds like a position that reports directly to the board. It would. And one that sets the company's long-term global direction. That's right. I let a moment pass, just long enough to enjoy the reversal of fortune. I accept. 3 months later, I was officially promoted. My new office sat 2 floors above Nathaniel's. My authority now spanned every international contract, every negotiation, every market expansion. It was the highest I'd ever climbed, and it felt earned. Lena never spoke to me again after the presentation, which was exactly how I preferred it, though I did hear from office gossip that she'd started taking Spanish lessons through another elite tutoring service, likely planning her next attempt at reinvention. I hoped her new instructor had more patience than I did. The irony was never lost on me. Lena had tried to sabotage my career because she felt I hadn't shown her enough reverence at a charity gala. But her petty campaign ended up exposing her fabrications, tanking her big investor moment, and paving the way for my rise to a position with more reach and influence than she'd ever touch. Sometimes, the universe really does have a sense of humor. Those 8 months of tutoring taught me more than just how to write phonetic Mandarin. They taught me about people like Lena, those who crave appearances over substance, who confuse arrogance for ability, and who believe entitlement equals leadership. But the business world isn't kind to frauds forever. Eventually, truth finds its voice. And when it does, those who built their power on illusion often fall hardest, especially when the person they tried to trample ends up holding the door they desperately want back through. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you for listening, for witnessing, and for remembering that sometimes the quiet professionals are the ones carrying the real weight behind the scenes. I want to hear from you. Truly, have you ever worked with someone like Lena? Someone more interested in appearing competent than actually being competent? Have you ever been pushed aside, underestimated, or punished for simply doing your job too well or not bowing to someone else's ego? If so, drop a comment. I'd love to read your story. And if you were rooting for me through every twist, let me know, because walking through that fire didn't just test my professionalism, it tested my belief that integrity would still matter in the end. And here's my advice. If you're going through something similar, don't trade your self-respect for short-term survival. Protect your reputation. Yes, be strategic. But don't let someone else's insecurity redefine your worth. The world has more Lenas than we'd like to admit. People who perform leadership instead of living it. Let them talk. Let them posture. But while they're rehearsing, you keep building. Eventually, someone will notice who actually knows what they're doing. And if you ever get the chance to step forward, step strong. Not for revenge, but for restoration. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life tales of workplace justice, personal power, and the quiet victories we rarely hear about, but deeply need. Because I promise you, this wasn't the last time I stood up to someone who thought they could rewrite my story without consequences. And next time, it'll be even better.